Let's start this episode with an introduction. I'd like to introduce you to an inspirational little girl. Her name is Amaya, and when she found out that some kids in her school weren't able to afford lunch and were accruing debt, she did what any 6-year-old would do and started a lemonade stand. How inspiring. Let's roll the clip.
Bullying and other social problems in schools, but it takes just one student to make a difference.
Just one. In tonight's Detroit 2020 report, we honor third grader Caden Tapalis as our person of the week.
8-year-old Caden Tapalis often participates in the classroom.
The first one, I'm pretty sure that's Missouri.
But one of his greatest lessons so far came in the lunch line.
I was in lunch one day getting lunch, and a kid in front of me didn't have enough money, and they had to put their tray down. And that made me sad. So I went home and I asked my mom, what can I do to help?
That moment sparked the third grader to help some of his classmates in a very grown-up way. Caden started collecting money to pay off the lunch debts for as many Challenger Elementary students as possible.
I am so sorry. That was the wrong clip. That was a little boy named Caden who did basically the same thing in 2014. Again, I'm really sorry about that. Don't pay attention to him. Here, this is the right clip. Let's find out about Amaya.
Cooking and mealtime are important parts of the Kirkpatrick family's day. So when 9-year-old Ryan had a conversation with his mom about kids who couldn't afford school lunches, he decided to do something about it. He asked his mom to find out how much fellow third graders at West Park Elementary School owed.
I think $74.50. So I took that email and came to Ryan and said, what do you want to do? And he said, I guess I can pay for it.
I don't get it. Guys, what was that? Come on. Sorry, new editors. That was Ryan, who did the same thing in 2019. Okay, I'm sure of it. This is the right clip.
Paying off school lunch debt for everybody at his school in the 2nd grade and students at 6 other schools. Kiani Ching, how did you do this? Of Vancouver, Washington, raised more than $4,000 selling special bracelets.
Damn it, Kiani, you can't keep stealing the spotlight. You're killing me here. Okay, if you haven't figured it out yet, this episode is about feel-good stories. The clip playing in the background right now is actually the one featuring Amaya, the 6-year-old with the lemonade stand. And while this episode isn't about her, it is about her story. Or rather, it's about her type of story. Feel-good stories come in many forms, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at 3 archetypes you've likely seen before and how they're used to gloss over the most dystopian parts of our society. All 3 types of feel-good narratives we're going to look at will take something macro, structural, and complex, and by transforming it into something one-dimensional, seemingly apolitical, and specifically heartwarming, will completely erase any structural analysis, and, in the process, neuter the idea that real change is possible. Let's go back to those news stories for a second. The first thing to notice about them is the framing. We're told, often by a very enthusiastic host, that these are inspiring, heartwarming, faith in humanity restoring stories. These kids are proof that, hey, not everything in this world is so gosh darn awful, and by golly, that makes me proud. And while, of course, what these kids are doing is unequivocally admirable, this framing and these stories' attachment to the feel-good vibes of a 5-minute segment is a complete journalistic failure. These are not feel-good stories. These are the marks of a dystopian nightmare. But the narrow scope that focuses on these kids, and not the reasons they're pushed to tackle this issue at such a young age, ignores very troubling questions an accurate report should address. Like, hey, why are 6-year-olds accruing debt in the first place? Why aren't these meals free? And why is this a news story in the richest nation in the world? To get an idea of what this story could be, imagine you just tweaked the headline slightly. Without twisting the truth in any way, the headline could just as easily have been 6-year-old resorts to child labor so her friends don't go hungry. And sure, it's just a lemonade stand, but no wonder that's not the headline they ran with. That's not heartwarming at all. Oh, wait, that's an actual Republican talking point? Well, not surprised. Sadly, it can get worse. Like in this story featuring first graders Vincent and Zach. When Zach was diagnosed with leukemia, his friend Vincent stepped in to help. Take a look.
Last June, after feeling ill and tired for weeks, Zach was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, a fast-growing cancer of the white blood cells. As for Vincent, he started asking questions and learning about cancer.
It's when your white blood cell and your red blood cell fight.
Then he learned that Zach's treatments were expensive.
We had been making these scarves just like this, and he just kind of said it would be cool if we could make a whole bunch of these and sell them.
He sold more than 20, earning a couple of $100.
You raised $200? That's a lot of money. Yeah, and who did you give it to?
Zach.
Why do these children, just 6 or 7 years old, have to ever worry about the cost of Zach's medical procedure on top of the fact that he is sick in the first place? And why is the burden of payment falling, at least in part, in the hands of another kid? They're 6. Just last year, they were learning to use a fork and a spoon and sometimes a table knife. This should not be a story, and the fact that it is, but that it is only presented in this digestible, even positive way, hides the very real problems that led to a child not having fair and affordable access to a necessary, life-saving medical procedure. Let's go back to the lunch debt stories for a minute. A good journalistic investigation should have addressed that over 1.5 million students in the US can't afford school meals, and that in 43% of school districts, that number is growing. A good report should acknowledge that the parents of kids who don't repay lunch debts have sometimes been threatened with their child going to foster care. A sensible report should ask questions like, hey, why are the ghouls at the Heritage Foundation spending thousands of dollars to run studies and write stories against programs like Universal Free Meals for Children that would clearly fix this issue? A good, accurate journalistic report needs to address the fact that some families are paid too little to afford school lunches, but are somehow not eligible for the free or reduced-price lunch programs, and that the federal funds meant to go towards child nutrition can't legally be used to erase these debts, meaning some schools are forced to take from educational program funds or let lunch debts accumulate. I'm sure some networks are running those stories too. But in that case, why also run this weird, dystopian, feel-good spin on a horrible situation affecting millions of kids across the country? The real story isn't that these kids have a fighting spirit, it's that the supposedly greatest, most accomplished capitalist system on Earth can't even feed all of its children. Heartwarming spins on dystopian events like these hide the real story that lurks behind them. That's why there's a problem with these reports. I get that we all want a positive break in what feels like an onslaught of negative news. That's normal, and we do deserve that kind of relief. But these are not the feel-good stories we are told they are. An accurate retelling of what happened here would focus on a structural issue, something that can and should be acted upon with enough political will. A real problem. This heartwarming spin makes it seem like everything is okay, like things are working out just fine, like the story is self-contained and there isn't a much bigger issue to deal with. These stories are not just a positive spin on a bad thing, they're a misdirection and a dangerous distraction from the problem. But even a distraction is just the first half of the battle. Some feel-good stories actually go so far as to rehabilitate the perpetrators of the problems they are trying to spin as inspirational. Take the immensely popular show Undercover Boss. In one episode, Modell's sporting goods employee Angel is telling the company's CEO how, after years of working at one of the chain's 150 locations, she is still forced to live in a homeless shelter with her family. Mitchell Modell listens to the story and man, does that just break his heart. Just look at what he does next.
Angel, here you are, a department manager in apparel, teaching me and showing me every inch of the way. You were just amazing.
I just hope that I'm doing good for you.
It was above and beyond anything I could have ever expected from an associate. But your talent level and the way you care about the company, you're the kind of leaders that we want in our company. And that's why I'm promoting you to assistant manager.
What? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I can't believe this.
We're giving you a $14,000 raise.
What?
I think about that homeless shelter where you go home every night since I left you. It kills me to see that you're still there. So I have a check for you. Because I want you to move out of there immediately, like tonight.
What? No, you cannot be serious.
I'm serious, and so I have on me a check for $250,000.
Oh my God. No. No. Oh my God. Oh my goodness.
Ignore the upbeat inspirational music for a second and think about what this story actually is. After years of work at this company, Angel can't even afford to house herself and her family. Rather than understand that this probably means the same is true for dozens of other employees at the hundreds of other storefronts and at every step of the production chain, Mitch comes in and promotes her out of her position, which really means that someone else is going to end up where she just was, and gives her a check to sweep this whole thing under the rug, implying the whole time that there are other employees, probably dealing with the same thing, who aren't as deserving as she is. It's a good gesture. Messed up, but ultimately good for Angel. But here again, the fact that the story adopts this microscopic lens ignores that this is a symptom of a much larger structural issue. This story implicates an entire corporate structure, and the economic background in which it operates, that either obliges or allows for such criminally low pay to come about in the first place. Just to give you an idea, Modell's Sporting Goods made around $765 million in revenue around when this was shot. $250K and a $14,000 raise is a life-changing amount of money, but it's a drop in a bucket so big you can swim laps in it. And again, it only addresses Angel's situation, ignoring that she is just one face of a problem certainly affecting more people across the whole company and our entire economy. But thanks to Undercover Boss, Mitchell gets to look good without actually doing anything meaningful, without actually changing anything about what his company did to put Angel in that bad place to start with. But since the whole thing is packaged following a typical story arc of setup, climax, and resolution, you're made to believe that there really is a happy ending to all this, that everything is wrapped tightly with a bow and we can move on to something else. Mitchell, and Modell's Sporting Goods in general, no longer looks like the cause of Angel's problems. We're made to think of them as the solution. This sort of inspirational narrative tries to kill political movements working to rectify massive issues like poverty-wage employment. By keeping the power struggles inherent to the political economy off camera, capitalism's built-in race to the bottom is cast aside and made to seem like an illegitimate concern. The only recourse to workplace injustice that is represented as legitimate is that of hoping that the CEO starts acting like a nicer dude one day and being a good little worker until that happens, ignoring entirely the pressures that make that attitude shift unlikely, if not outright impossible, in our hyper-competitive economy in which executives have little reason to ever do more than the minimum. Undercover Boss, and shows like it, completely set aside the more controversial but infinitely more productive conversation about labor laws and workers' rights. The show doesn't, and would never dare to, address the idea that a union or better legislation would help the workers 100 times more than the benevolent actions of one executive for one employee. But that version of the show would never air. It wouldn't serve its function if it did. Undercover Boss reproduces the neoliberal imaginary, in which employees exist and function independently of collective interest groups or state support to improve their deplorable conditions. Undercover Boss promotes charity as an effective tool of neoliberal capitalism, when its function is primarily ideological, to obviate any discussion of the exploitation of labor. In these shows, workers are unfairly presented as helpless, and their CEOs are their saviors. There's one more type of feel-good story, and it's probably the part of the thumbnail that made you click on this video. I'm sorry to say it, but movements like Team C's are sadly very much like lunch debt saviors and benevolent executives in that they try to be uplifting, but come up short when you realize what they're trying to cover up. As a heads up, this section of the episode is mostly inspired by this video by Simon Clark. So make sure that you go check it out after you're done here for more details on what we're talking about from a different lens of analysis. Okay, back to Team C's. Team C's works a lot like most feel-good stories. In their project announcement video, Mr. Beast and Mark Rober have a fun competition. Get as much plastic out of the water as possible in just a day. Rober has a robot and Mr. Beast has a cleanup crew of volunteers. The whole video is whimsical, entertaining, and overall a good vehicle for the follow-up project to the extremely popular Team Trees initiative from 2019. Like the other feel-good stories, it's uplifting. This time, the team announced that their goal is to raise $30 million to remove 30 million pounds of trash from the oceans in 3 years. Just like the lunch debt kids or the charitable CEOs, this action is not bad in and of itself. And in critiquing it, we should be careful not to fall into the doomer mindset of, nothing is ever good enough anyway, so why do we do anything at all? It is a good thing that they are raising money to take trash and plastics out of the ocean. What is more problematic is that the attachment of the pair to an apolitical, feel-good narrative and to the dominantly visual format of YouTube videos dramatically hinders the scope of the project and might mean that Team Seas ends up doing more harm than good in the long run. It's not just that the project will only tackle 0.01% of all the plastic in the ocean, or that it'll clean up in 3 years what is dumped in 15 hours. It's that it hides these facts behind numbers that seem big and visuals of beaches and rivers becoming pristine overnight. The goal is to make us feel just motivated enough to donate a couple dollars, without telling us that they won't ever end up doing that much. To be fair to the Team Seas project, they acknowledge that this project is not a silver bullet solution to the problem of plastic pollution, and that greater governmental action and cooperation between local and international forces is necessary. But that comment barely lasts 30 seconds in a much longer video dedicated entirely to something else. What's more, that kind of self-awareness is completely drowned out by the constant affirmation that this project is saving the oceans, and that the real source of the pollution is a select number of rivers, instead of the clearly culpable industrial production of plastic and its domination by the interests of fossil fuel companies. The problem is that the kind of change that is needed to actually have an impact on this issue, whether it's resisting these large corporations' interests, committing governments and industries to shutting down excessive plastic production, creating the correct infrastructure for trash disposal, and/or stopping the flow of trash from the imperial core to the global south, doesn't look impressive on camera or make for a feel-good, inspirational video that you can just throw money at. It is much easier for Mr. Beast and Mark Rober to satisfy our need for wanting something to change with a project that has an easy-to-understand and see, even if minuscule, impact, than to actually promote meaningful change. They could have done this better, but it might not have been as good of a video, and so they didn't. The reason this is a problem, according to Simon Clark's video, is that it results in mass complacency. We become satisfied with small actions, thinking we've done our part, and letting the actually meaningful projects fade into the background while we put off necessary action. This sadly lets the problem, and the piles of trash in the ocean, accumulate over time. In his video, Simon touches on the self-licensing phenomenon that these kinds of projects trigger in us, that make us feel accomplished even after we've barely done anything and make us less likely to actually commit to meaningful change down the line. Like with the other kinds of feel-good video, it's important that we don't passively accept these narratives, and instead see these projects as what they are, a way to smooth over the horrors our global capitalist economy has produced. Whether it's local news segments, TV shows, or massive charity campaigns, feel-good stories have the ability to undermine our resistance to our society's greatest issues if we let them. We do not have to. And keeping a critical mind every time we encounter stories like this is the first step to organizing for something better because, whether we like it or not, these stories aren't going to stop. We can demand more from our institutions and our politics. Let's stop letting 5-minute feel-good stories try to convince us otherwise.